Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery preparing to check in on one of my worm bins. As you can see from the label here, this is a variety of different worms living in it, so I refer to it as my mixed batch of worms here, or my mixed worm bin. So I've got red wigglers, RW is indicating red wiggler, European nightcrawler, ENC, and Indian blue worms. And this is a pretty young system, not even a month old now. It's only 24 days of age. And even before the worms got introduced to this system, there was some food placed in here for them as sort of a welcome meal. And then we waited 12 days until the first check-in. And that was the last time we checked in here to come back in and feed them, at which point they got feeding number 2. And today on day 24, it's been another 12 days. So even though we've been sort of establishing a 12-day pattern in the feeding intervals, it doesn't mean we're set on doing it in that way. It just happened to turn out that way. Now, the one thing we noticed when we checked in here last time, 12 days ago, even before we removed the plastic cover, we noticed some flying insects crawling around, and I think we even turned the plastic over, or whatever the case was. I forget, maybe this paper, when it was still resting on top of the plastic instead of below it, I think we turned this over and we saw a whole bunch of flying insects crawling around on it. I don't know, I don't see any. It seems unusual. I've been coming in here just like I told myself I would, and like I announced during the last video, that I've been applying my mosquito dunk solution using my little spray bottle. So like they say is the best thing to do, since the flying insects do occupy only the very surface of the material of the bin. The best place to try to treat them with this mosquito dunks solution to try to eliminate them is at the top surface. So something I often forget to do is apply it at the very beginning. And it's only after I've tilled things up that I realize that, oh geez, if I really wanted to apply it in the best possible way, I probably should have done so at the very beginning. So I put that stuff out there as a reminder to myself to do it right from the get-go, even though perhaps the issue might have been resolved by now, because I don't see any. But you know, I'm just going to knock on wood with that, because I don't exactly know for sure if they're gone or not. Be nice to think so. It just seems like we had some flying insects that appeared to be occupying this system, of which we saw clear evidence during the last check-in, but so far I don't see anything. The stuff actually doesn't kill anything outright. It just prevents the development of the fly larvae from ever becoming an adult worm, an adult fly. So it just sort of inhibits them from maturing into a flying insect when you apply that stuff. So perhaps we've solved our problem here. I've been looking around in various other systems just to see if perhaps they might have moved in elsewhere. Perhaps they found themselves another worm bin of mine that they prefer more. So I did come down here a couple days ago to apply that stuff into here and into a couple other places where I thought I saw some worms I keep calling them worms, some little fruit flies or gnats or whatever they were buzzing around, but I'm kind of glad to report that I don't see any in here. So between the application I put in here a couple days ago, plus the little bit that we just squirted in, hopefully it's adequate, and I will be watching to make sure we don't see any of those little pesky flying insects causing an outbreak in any of my systems. I had just run out of the stuff last time. We had just poured in what remained into this system, and then I told myself I would prepare more. So I think somebody even asked, how do I prepare it? So I came here with this old milk jug to show you guys how I put the mosquito dunk into that old sock over there to create sort of a tea bag that I suspend down in the water. This way the mosquito dunk, all that little granular material that it's made up of, doesn't end up clogging the nozzle of my spray applicator bottle. And then this way I could just pour it straight out of the pitcher in which the stuff is steeping, so that we can refill as needed. So down here in the feeding zone, I think we're probably ready for some more food. The stuff they got last time, I remember there was a lot of potato peels, and usually the potato peels themselves will get eaten up, but the worms will leave behind the skin of the potato. So if we start seeing a lot of stuff that looks like potato skins, that'll be the leftovers of the last feeding they got 12 days ago. And they'll eventually break it all down. It's just that part of the potato is a little bit slower to go than the rest of the juicy, starchy, yummy potato that they like to nibble off the skin. There was also some, all right, here it is. This is the leftovers of the potato skin, stripped clean of any potato that might have been on it. And then in time they'll break down the rest of the stuff too, but it's just the juicy actual potato that they like to strip off the skin in the very beginning. So I've got to keep reminding myself that besides coming in here with the mosquito dunks solution, which was one of our to-dos from last time, to remind ourselves to make sure we try to tackle any sort of an outbreak of possible flying insects that would gladly make themselves at home here in this system. The other thing that we hinted at last time, and based on the people's comments in the video from last time, it did seem like most people were in agreement that it would be a good idea to alter the method that we feed this system a little bit from what the norm around here is. The norm is typically just to excavate a pit right down the middle and apply their feeding there, right down the middle. But we thought we would change things up here a little bit just to increase the novelty of this bin a little bit. And we thought we might adopt the so-called ping-pong or back and forth feeding method, where you don't always use the same spot to feed each time. You switch it. You keep going from one location to the other. And I guess that's how I kind of came up with this idea to call it the ping-pong approach, which is just to feed it on one side and then the next time go feed it on the opposite side. And then alternate each time you feed. And then this way, if you put any sort of slower composting food items in to the feeding zone, you can kind of check in on it the next time, but then in a way reset it the way you found it and let it continue as if it had been uninterrupted or undisturbed, and let it continue until the next feeding cycle. And then I guess it also sort of promotes a little bit of movement of the worms back and forth through their environment. So we figured we would try this edge feeding, ping-pong style feeding this time. So why don't we start setting them up with some of the bedding we're going to put in here. I've got a bunch of soiled napkins here. I've got a whole bunch of them, but we're not going to use all of them. I'm just going to put a few in right below the feeding zone. I figured perhaps 3 of these nice large napkins would be adequate to place our feeding on top of. Stuff is going to go in dry because the stuff that we're going to be feeding them is some nice juicy veggies that were in my freezer, and as the stuff begins to thaw, I suspect that it's going to, emit a little bit of moisture. All these cucumber peels, these chunks of lettuce, there's some onion in here, some tomato. I had a feeling that it would be unnecessary to dampen the napkin if we were to just place some of these nice veggies right on top of it. And then, I think we could be pretty generous with the bedding. Perhaps I can come in with those other 3 napkins I've got over there on the side. I wasn't sure if we would end up using them all, but I think we could. And I definitely like the idea of being super generous with the bedding in this bin. Because, these worms, they started out as a fairly minuscule population in the very beginning, in their previous environment, that went 400 days before we finally moved them out and put them into here. And at the beginning of those 400 days, I guess at this point 424 days ago. We had started out with what we estimated to be only 36 worms, believe it or not. We started them out in a fairly small container, and when it seemed like they had outgrown that space, we went ahead and we upgraded them to a slightly larger container. Very similar in dimensions to this, just shallower. And then now it did feel to us like it was time to move them up into one of my normal sized containers. So that accounts for how they ended up here. So I think we can set this coffee aside. We'll sprinkle that in at the end on top of everything else. But we'll get these juicy vegetables on top of the dry napkins to try to help with the hydration of that dry material. We'll also sprinkle in a little bit of this pulverized eggshell, which is what I use as grit in my bins. Some people use rock dust or crustacean shells or whatever they might have laying around that seems suitable. So it doesn't matter so much as long as it's a tiny particle size material, small enough to fit into the mouths of the tiny worms. And then they get it down into their gizzard, and it helps with the digestion of the foods that they're consuming. So I just returned some of these old pieces of paper that were down within the bin on top of the foods. We put in grit. We could put in the coffee, I suppose, and I've got my worm chow. Oh, geez, making a mess here. I might have to sweep that up later, but I think we can salvage this one piece that landed on the handle of our bin. I like to accompany the coffee with a little bit of worm chow usually, so let's sprinkle some of that on top. And I've also got this other stuff that I would like to include too. It's this pulverized corn cob, which also includes the kernels of the corn. So I thought maybe we can use some of this nice shredded paper cardboard leafy mix, which is my prepared bedding, just so we can kind of have bedding nested in between the various layers of different foods that we're giving them. And that should make for a space that the worms are really going to appreciate. So I think we're getting pretty close to the point where we can cover up. And since we didn't really have a chance to excavate this far end of the system, furthest away from where we're feeding now and where we're going to be feeding the next time we come in here, why don't we use that as an excuse to just till up this edge and use the material that we pull out to cover up our feeding zone with. Yeah, things look pretty nice everywhere. That wasn't really in question. I wasn't doubting that it would be. I just sort of like to be thorough, and I guess I'm curious, so I figured we would kind of till up that far end of the system that we'd not yet really peeked into. We went kind of straight for the feeding zone, excavated there, checked out what kind of leftovers we would bump into, if any. And I saw a little bit of cantaloupe rind, skin, whatever, but not a whole lot of anything else of the foods we gave them last time. So they're doing a great job, and we're definitely giving them spacious accommodations, hopefully triggering sort of a breeding response in the worms, because oftentimes the worms can sense that they've got plenty of space to move around in and occupy. And when they do, they'll often also kind of reproduce to the point where they try to fill up the space that's available to them. So I figured, you know, before we close up shop here, I should get this little bit of coffee that fell into the system as well. And then over here is our piece of paper, which had always in the past in the old system rested out on top of the plastic covers, but we decided last time that it was going to suit a it was going to serve a much more noble purpose by being down within reach of the worms to nibble on as they see fit to do so, especially since the moisture that collects on the plastic, since it's unable to evaporate beyond the plastic, it all just sort of condenses over there on the plastic and then drops right back down into the system. And as it lands on these top covering papers that I like to put out for the worms. The worms also help themselves to nibbling away at the top coverings, and that's part of the reason I like putting it out there for them. So I think we're pretty much done. I did actually even come in here with a replacement top covering, thinking that if that old paper bag was so far gone that we would have to replace it, then we could. So I'd even taken a piece of newspaper and prepared it as possibly a replacement top covering, but I think we can go one more round. But if you ask me, by the next time we get in here, that piece of paper is going to be so far gone that we're just not going to be able to drape it out like that anymore as a top covering. It's simply going to be bedding if it even survives till then. So that's it for our check-in with the mixed red worms over here in our 24-day-old system. This is now feeding number 3. Giving them a lot of space to roam around in. Pretty generous feeding. In this ping-pong approach, we'll go back and forth. So the next time we'll feed on the opposite side and mark it similarly to show ourselves where we last fed. All right, everyone, that's it for the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.